Hey everyone, it's Kathy the Vegan Prepper. This is the latest in my food preservation a little at a time series, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Vegan Prepper. Vegan Prepper. Okay, so first off, as a disclaimer, I've got my 3-year-old in the background. She's watching a show. You probably can hear it. And I'm just trying to keep her entertained so I can get this filmed. If I don't film it now, it won't get filmed for kind of a long time. I have a lot of stuff going on and I need to get this food put away. So please give me a little bit of grace that there might be shenanigans going on in the background, but I will do my best to still deliver really good information and keep it focused and moving right along. If you notice, I actually look a little different from the thumbnail because this is my second time filming, because the first time I filmed while I was exhausted, it was another inopportune time and I ended up rambling for 36 minutes. So that's not going to happen this time. And that being said, let's get into it. First of all, I'm going to take you to my kitchen and show you the fermented eggplant that I put together from my garden. All right, so here's the big gallon jar of fermented eggplant. It was quite a giant pile of eggplant, which I cut and put in the jar to ferment. It's eggplant's sort of more this style, the Japanese eggplant long variety. It smells absolutely incredible and I can't wait to dig into that. It is basically about ready for it to go into the fridge. So like I said, that was from my garden. And so I had a huge bowl of Japanese eggplant I chopped up and fermented. And if you remember from one of my previous food preservation videos, I actually also did a big half-gallon jar of jalapenos fermented from my garden. And I am completely out of my large jars. I really need to get some more. But what I'm wanting to do to hopefully save some space and get them into smaller jars so that I can have those big jars back is I'm thinking of running both of those fermented items through my food processor to just sort of mince it and put it back in the fridge to make it more like a condiment. And anybody out there who's more experienced in fermenting than I am, if you have knowledge about why that might not be a good idea, I would love to hear that. I personally can't think of why it would be a bad idea, but if you know something I don't, please let me know down in the comments below. So I feel like if nobody else watches the rest of this video at all, just please answer my question. Is it okay to chop up the fermented stuff smaller just so that we can use it more easily and it's more of a thing you can just pull out of the fridge and just like scoop over top of stuff rather than something you always have to like chop up before you use it, because nobody's eating whole jalapeno slices in my house, well except me, and nobody's eating the whole sliced eggplant in my house. So anyway, I just sort of have to work with what I got. But okay, all that being said, that was it. That's the only fermented project, and the rest of this is all dehydrated stuff. This is also not all of what I have done. This is just what I have to show that I haven't put away yet or haven't put away into instant meals already, and I'll just sort of get into that immediately again. So first up, we've got banana fruit leather. Now, when I first made a giant batch of banana fruit leather, this was 100% stuffed full, as well as another jar had the banana fruit leather in it. So basically what happened was this last time we bought a 40-pound box of bananas, which is just how we buy our bananas so that we can have a reasonable amount that lasts us, you know, a reasonable amount of time. Family of 5 vegans, we go through some bananas with smoothies, and then once they kind of get a little too ripe, I go ahead and start freezing them, and then we get another 40-pound box of bananas and just sort of repeat the process. We use the frozen bananas for banana nice cream, but also just for our smoothies. And eventually that nice little stack of bananas is really handy for us to have on hand. For instance, if there is a time when I need to really cut back on grocery budget, I have it kind of stashed in the fridge or in the freezer already, and I don't necessarily need to buy bananas every single time we run out. So that's really handy. We do work through them. I don't just like build a stash and never touch it. But this time around, when we got those bananas, they were already yellow. Normally they're still kind of green. And so I have a little bit more of a leeway leeway with time for when I get to use them and process them. I get a little more time. This time they were pretty much ready to eat when we brought them home. And even as fast as we go through bananas, that was a little too fast. So even though I did freeze some, I just sort of ran out of time, and the bananas got to the point where they were not bad. They weren't like moldy, but they get to this point inside where they turn almost nothing but this glossy golden yellow color, and the whole thing is kind of oozy, and actually sometimes it'll even kind of leak out of the banana, but again, it's not bad. It's just like so ripe that it's no longer appetizing to us anyway. But at that point, they're even kind of too ripe to freeze. If you try to turn that into banana nice cream, you will end up with something that's too crystally to be enjoyable, and it's just not going to be good. And I know that, and I had quite a pile. It was probably a good 30 or 40 bananas that had kind of gotten to this point. I just hadn't been able to get to them in time because I can only freeze 2 trays at a time myself. I've got 1 freezer on my fridge and 1 freezer, a chest freezer out in my Arizona room, which I can freeze 2 trays at a time, and it still takes, you know, at least a whole day to freeze. So anyway, I was running out of time, and it just suddenly occurred to me, why not make fruit leather with that? Because the riper they get, the sweeter they get, the more sugar they get. And I thought to myself, I wonder if they would be nice and floppy without adding anything else. But I also know from experience that it gets pretty thin. So this time, basically, I took the bananas along with chia seeds and lemon juice, and I just did fruit leather on parchment paper in my Excalibur 9 tray dehydrator. I know that there are silicone mats, but I haven't been motivated to buy those yet because, especially for fruit leathers, what you do is you just dehydrate them right on the parchment, and then I pull them out of the dehydrator, and while they're still warm, I roll them up and I use a serrated knife to chop them so that they're already rolled up in parchment. There's people that like go through this whole thing where they pull it out and then they roll it up like strip by strip afterwards, like having to cut strips of parchment paper. I just don't have time for that. This works so well. You basically just do the cut, and then while it's rolled up, you just toss it right in the jar, and then you've got your fruit leather. So this was the first time I did a batch this large of fruit leather. We were so enjoying it, and I'll show you. All it was the banana and the chia, and it's just like totally pliable. Like, it's not breaking. It's a beautiful texture. And it's because those bananas were so sweet. So like I said, it was just bananas, lemon juice, and chia seeds, probably a good 1/4 cup of chia seeds per blenderful. And that was, again, just to make the mixture a little thicker so that I was able to pour it super thick without it being, you know, worrying about it running off the sides. And it just worked out so perfectly. I feel like this is how I'm going to do my fruit leathers from now on. I loved adding the chia. Now, these would not be for really long-term storage anyway. They still probably would be good for at least a year or 2 maybe. But especially with the addition of the chia, it's the fat doesn't last as long in long-term storage, but also dehydrated fruits tend to have a much shorter shelf life because of the fact that they are so sweet. The sugar ends up pulling moisture from the air, and the more moisture that gets into them, the faster they go bad. So these have been sitting on the counter for like a two weeks or something like that. And they've been great. Obviously, we've been eating through them and really enjoying them. Actually, it's mainly Mr. Vegan Prepper. He loves this. So like I have shared many times before that he was really into jerky before we went vegan. He loved his beef jerky and all of that. But he has discovered since going vegan that for him personally, it was never really so much about the meat itself. It was more about that chew, like having something to rip and chew on. So he loves himself now some dried fruit. So we've got like dried apricots up here. We've got dried mango is another favorite. And man, he loves ripping into these and eating them. And that's just like sort of the replacement for that texture experience that he's craving, if that makes sense. I find that's true for a lot of food since we've gone vegan. It's a lot of times not really about the thing itself. You're craving the experience that food used to give you. And so yeah, that's something that's great for him. So he really loves this, and I'm calling that a win. So I just figured I'd share that with you. I think they got dried at something like 135 or something like that. And it took a good day and a half, I'm pretty sure, probably just because the layers were so thick. They were pretty thick. You can see like that ends up being pretty thick. And it was pretty thick, and there were all 9 trays were totally full. So yeah, it was a good way to preserve all of those bananas. Okay, so the very next thing that I want to talk about is my moringa. So I pulled this from one of the trees in my backyard. I've got 3 moringa trees in my backyard. They are gorgeous and green right now. Moringa itself is incredibly high in nutrients. It's a great thing to have on hand. I originally had dried it, and I filled an entire half-gallon jar with the whole leaves, but again, I'm running out of my jars. So I decided to take it and crumble it, and then it fits in this jar instead. So the reason I tend to store in whole leaf form is because it lasts a lot longer that way, but if I have to save space, I will crumble it, but then I'll just, you know, make it a point to use it faster. So I'll be using this in teas, but also potentially as soil amendment in my garden. I love to crumble moringa into the soil around the base of my plants and sort of bury it and let it become a natural way of feeding nourishment to my plants, an on-site soil amendment. So this is not just, you know, nourishment for us or like a survival food for us. It's also to help nourish my plants, and, you know, just one less thing that I have to buy. They do really seem to love it, and the garden seems to thrive with it on there. So it's a win-win all around. The next thing is another thing from my garden. So these are actually my jalapenos. And so kind of for a long time, I've been wanting to experiment with taking my jalapenos and drying them and then crushing them so that I can get my own red chili flakes for putting into recipes and stuff, just to make it just one less thing that I have to buy. If I'm producing it on site, I like to think, how can I use that to cut something else out that I have to buy? So I'm by no means self-sufficient. I'm not even close, but hey, you know, a little bit at a time, I hope to eventually eliminate a lot more things that I have to actually purchase at a store. So I also know red chili flakes are typically made with cayenne pepper instead of jalapeno pepper, but again, jalapeno is what I have on hand, and my jalapenos are crazy spicy. Jalapenos are kind of famous for the range of spiciness that they can contain. You can have some jalapenos that are pretty mild and some jalapenos that are pretty crazy spicy. Mine are of the crazy spicy variety. I don't know if they're as spicy as a cayenne pepper or whatever, but I mean, it feels like it. Just a little bit of this in a dish and it's like, ah, you know, your nose starts running, the steam starts coming out of your ears, and all is right with the world. I love me some spicy food. But basically, I had been drying jalapenos out of my garden for a couple of years and just storing them whole. Again, kind of needing some jars back. I finally decided it is time to go ahead and complete this project. So I went and blitzed it in my blender. You can see there's actually some pretty large pieces in here. So it didn't turn into red chili flakes. It's like red chili in chunks. And I tend to also let my jalapenos go red before I use them or dry them, just because I prefer the flavor that way. They are so tasty and so wonderful when they're fully ripe. So just in case you didn't know, a green jalapeno is still totally usable. You pick it off the plant, but if you let it ripen all the way, it will turn red. And also, just as a point of interest, they tend to go black before they go red. So this is the black is, it's interesting. It doesn't turn black after red. It turns black before it goes red. I don't know, I think that's interesting. But the reason I have this here to show you is because of the mistake I realized I made with these. So typically with my whole jalapenos, I'll just take a fork and I'll stick the tines through. You know, the 4 tines of the fork, like the bottom one will stick through, and usually the second one will poke it too. And that's just to poke it. Like you can do it with a toothpick or whatever. I just use forks. I don't really have toothpicks in the house. But I do that and then I dry them whole. But what I had done was I didn't take the stem off. I should have taken the stem off because it was impossible to remove the stem once they were dry. I had to physically cut the stem off, and I ended up losing some of the top of each one of the jalapenos. It's not too big of a deal. It gets composted, but now I know, because it's really easy to pop the stem off as long as it's fresh. You just go boom, and like there's no stem now. So that's obviously way easier to do than cutting like 800 dry jalapenos once they're dry. And then, yeah, it works out really well. So this is delicious. It's absolutely amazing. I'm so glad that I have it. And yeah, this is what I'm going to be starting to use in all of my dishes instead of red chili flakes that I buy from the store. All right, the next thing I'd like to talk to you about is this tiny jar of strawberry tops. So I think you guys know, if you've watched me for any amount of time, you know that I like to take my organic strawberries and chop off the top and then dehydrate the top so that I have just these little dried strawberry tops. And the leaves themselves are actually a relative of red raspberry leaves, and they have some of the same helpful actions on the body as red raspberry leaves. So I like to have that. So it's like an herbal remedy, but also they the yummy fruit. And so you can use this to infuse waters, or if you make a lemonade, toss these in there and kind of make a strawberry infused lemonade, or create your own tea blends that have strawberry chunks in there, and you can make tea out of it, and it's so delicious. And anybody who has bought teas at herb shops probably knows that anytime you have a fruity tea that has like little strawberry chunks or fruit chunks in it, it gets really expensive. And so this way you can save, even if you just compost the tops, like that's still good, it goes back into the soil, but this way they get another use even before they hit the compost. So, you know, once they go through a tea or once they infuse water, then they can go ahead and get composted, but first you can get one last little use out of them. So I love to just dehydrate my strawberry tops. I am the only one in my family who remembers to do it. Nobody else does it. They just take the strawberry and just eat it and get their spit all over the top like a bunch of barbarians. And I'm the only one who remembers to actually cut this. I've got like 3-quart jars of strawberry tops in my cabinet that I'm still working through, and then this is just like the latest batch, but I just thought I'd mention it again in case anybody is still getting good strawberries right now. This is a great way to utilize your strawberries, just like that one little extra way. In my very last day in the life video, I did go through the process of how I water, saute, and caramelize onions using just water and like a little bit of salt. And so I can link that down below. These are so delicious. I think this ended up being a total of 15 onions, like giant, big red onions, and I'm still working through preserving all of the onions I got because I accidentally got like 50 pounds of onions. It was an accident, okay? Because I called the place and I put in my order before I go pick it up because that's the way that they have it set up, and they had onions, red onions, $11. And the guy said, well, we get 25-pound bags sometimes, and sometimes we get 50-pound bags, because like he was cautioning me. Like, this is a lot of onions. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But I was thinking at $11, it's got to be the 25-pound bag. No, it was the 50-pound bag. I got 50 pounds of red onions for $11. And I like to buy my produce, certain kinds of produce, like my potatoes, my onions, certain ones that kind of last longer, in bulk like that, to just be frugal and save money. But now I am working through preserving all of that. So dehydrating these caramelized onions was just amazing. It filled the house with an amazing smell, good smell. Apparently, if you dehydrate raw onions, it's not good. So raw onion is one of the things that you can dehydrate without blanching. You can also freeze it without blanching. So I've been freezing a lot of it without blanching as well. But these are fantastic, like little chips. I mean, it basically tastes like French fried onions, but without, you know, the breading, of course, and they're so good. I mean, I did these to add flavor to instant meals, but I might just end up snacking on them in secret. That might be their fate. I don't know if they're gonna make it to the instant meals. They are so delicious. I might need to just make more. But yeah, those turned out fantastic. And so that was just the dehydrated or the caramelized onions on fruit leather trays. In my Nesco All-American round dehydrator is how I did those, just to make sure that all the little juices got dehydrated as well, and I didn't lose any of that. And yeah, it turned out great. I think it was like $125 or something like that. So anyway, I'll link that video down below that kind of talks about the process. And anyway, that's an idea of it. Oh my gosh, these are they're ridiculous. The next project I have here is my dehydrated corn. So this is actually 10 pounds of frozen corn, which I dehydrated because I needed to make room in my freezer. So I just went and dehydrated all of that corn. And so it's kind of incredible because it was 2 rather large bags of frozen corn from Costco, plus a little extra. And it turned out, because what I did to freeze, so what I did to dehydrate these, because I do use frozen corn in a lot of my recipes, I wanted to make absolutely sure that I knew what the measurements were, so that I knew what the conversion would be for when I make a recipe out of the dehydrated corn versus the frozen corn. And so what I did was, in my Excalibur dehydrator with the big trays, I was able to put 4 cups of frozen corn on each tray. I think until I got the very last one was like only 3 cups. But basically I just knew there's 4 cups on each tray, so that when it came out of the dehydrator, I measured each tray to see, you know, what is the measurement, and it was very consistently 4 cups turned into 1 1/4 cup of dehydrated corn. And so this right there too, also it's a massive reduction, right, in volume, which is another plus for dehydrating. You know, if you have a very small space and you don't have a lot of freezer space, or if you need to free up space in your freezer for something else, like I did here, go ahead and do some dehydrating. It's fantastic. And then it'll save you a lot of space. And then once you know the conversion, also I did vacuum seal these with my brake bleeder pump and the jar attachment for the food saver, to just help them last even longer, because I'm not necessarily planning on putting these in long-term storage. These are going to be more like I might use these in recipes. But the math on it worked out that 5 tablespoons of the dehydrated corn equals 1 cup. So now I know that, and I'm gonna have to write that down somewhere a little bit more permanent than this. I know that so that when I go to do my recipes, I know how much corn to use. And then when you use dehydrated foods in recipes, even though typically these go into soups, and I think it works out to be 7.5 tablespoons will equal 1.5 cups of frozen corn, which tends to be the amount that I put in my chili, my soups, whatever. And that is basically, that would be like a scant half cup. So you would, in a recipe, want to add probably at least as much water as dehydrated food to make sure that it gets rehydrated and doesn't steal water from your recipe. But because mostly these go into soups, or like a chili, which I want to get thicker anyway, I'm not going to worry about the extra water. But that's about how you would kind of cook with dehydrated foods. This is another great thing too, that when you have frozen foods, you can dehydrate them immediately without doing any blanching, because the blanching and preparation has already been done for you. And so you might wonder, why on earth would you do that? And it's, you know, for stuff like this. And a lot of times I would, you know, roast a vegetable first before I use it, but I use this straight up. It rehydrates very well into basically almost just like a fresh piece of corn, and I'm not concerned with cooking this before I rehydrate it, because it rehydrates very well, and I know that. But a lot of times, like for instance this, I cooked it all the way before it got dehydrated, because when it gets rehydrated into my meals, I don't want to be necessarily chomping on raw onion. I mean, maybe, but mostly not. And the cooked foods tend to rehydrate better. Like I said, these rehydrate very well. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking about that. If I forget to say something, I'll just put it on the screen. Okay, so the last thing, because I'm also very focused on creating instant meals, I have some here actually. This little bucket is full of these bags of instant meals. I think there's 16 total meals. This was a bunch of fresh brown rice pasta, which I dehydrated and have already put into instant meals. I am currently working on brainstorming a homemade 72-hour bucket as an emergency thing to grab, like if we had to evacuate for any reason, or whatever. Like if there was some reason the whole family had to chop in the truck unexpectedly and go, we would have something to grab and take with us to have food, you know, in whatever situation. So this is all the same meal, actually. Fish taco. It is not fish, it's just the fish taco seasoning blend that I love so much to give it flavor. And then just beans and brown rice pasta. I think there is corn in these. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the thing is, the problem is that these are only 365 calories each. And that's, so if there's 16 meals in the bucket, that is not even close to what we need as a family for, I don't know if it's even one day, because we need a total of 36,000 calories for our family. I have estimated from all of our BMR rates for the basal metabolic rate of each one of my family. I did not take the lower end, and I didn't take the extreme high end. I took the mid range for like intense activity, but not like crazy athlete activity level. And so that gives me a figure of 36,000 calories for 3 days for our family. And I have to hit that. And if I have to hit that, there's no way I'm going to make a 72-hour bucket. It's going to be more like a 24-hour bucket. And I'll just have to have 3 of them. Anyway, I don't need to talk so much about that. But it is important because I'm talking about this right now. So basically I'm going to have to move over to something like quinoa. Quinoa is much more calorie dense. I can't remember how many calories you get per 1 cup of cooked quinoa. I'm going to put it right here. I do know it's I think it's basically even more than just in one of those meals is just already in the quinoa. As far as caloric density. This is one of the biggest challenges of being whole foods, plant-based, vegan, whatever, is coming up with long-term food solutions that are calorie dense. It's really hard because again, with the things with fats, you can't store them as long. You can't rely on them as long. I don't want to talk too much about the 72-hour bucket, but for instance, I know for my strategy personally, probably it's going to be oatmeals for the morning with bunches of seeds in there to help, you know, increase the calories. You know, something like a quinoa dish and lunch and dinner, probably both, or grain of some kind to increase the calories. But also into the buckets, I will put things like banana fruit leathers, maybe even some hot chocolate mixes, and like a bag of nuts or seeds to just basically drive up the calorie content of the bucket without it necessarily having to be all my own meals. So my own meals, for the most part, I would keep focused on the long-term storage, so I don't have to keep switching those out, but I'll focus on maybe, you know, like I said, putting a bag of nuts or seeds in there, and then like once a year I'll just pull the bag of nuts and seeds out, replace it with another one, and then we'll just eat through whatever I pull out of the bucket, if that makes sense. So that's so far kind of what I've brainstormed through on that, but it's, man, it's an issue trying to work that out and working out like what's gonna be the easiest to do on the go. And for me, I feel like it is, you know, just instant meals. If there were, you know, a lot of really good options for vegans in prepackaged meals, that might be an option, but honestly there just isn't. So I'm having to create my own, and as I do, believe me, I will absolutely be making videos on that. But like I said, I'm just still in the brainstorming process myself. But this is another fantastic thing. Kind of like with the corn, this was 12 entire cups of cooked quinoa, a full 12 cups of cooked quinoa, and it dehydrated to about 3.5 cups total volume. So it's less than half again. So I can hit that 1 cup of cooked quinoa with less quinoa. So it's really important to know the ratios, and I didn't do the math yet on the ratio of what that means of this, what of this equals 1 cup of cooked quinoa, but I do have that information, and I can do that calculation so that when I start putting together my instant meals for my 72-hour kits, I can calculate the calories. So it's just important for that. Also, this is another batch of the chana dal. It's, I think, Cinna dal on the channel. It's a recipe video I already have up. I will link it down below. So we talked about challenges of whole food plant-based, but this is one of the super amazing perks of whole food plant-based is when you have a recipe without oil or whatever in it, you can just throw that on the dehydrator and not have to worry about it almost every single time. So this basically was cooked in my pressure cooker exactly like I did it on the recipe video. And then what I like to do is place the leftovers into the fridge overnight so that, I don't know, the starches of the beans kind of go out. It really thickens up the sauce, because even if you just let it cool in the Instant Pot, the sauce itself is still going to be really soupy, and so you're not going to have something that's going to be easily dehydrated on a fruit leather tray. So you're looking for something a little thicker that's easier to spread out. So I know, for instance, and actually both of these were dehydrated in my Nesco All-American, the round one, with the fruit leather trays. So the quinoa, just because it's so tiny, I put it on the fruit leather trays. The other really handy thing about those is I know that each fruit leather tray can hold about 2 cups of food. So every time I dehydrate in the fruit leather trays, I'm dehydrating 2 cups per tray, which is how I know how much I have. So this one was 4 fruit leather trays. It was 2 cups per tray. So this was 8 cups of chana dal, and it reduced down to just a quart. So this was only about 50% smaller than it started. And actually this is so full, I had to like squash it and like turn the lid. It's so full you can't even, well, you can hear the crunching because the stuff is like right there. But now I know how much I have in each one of these, how much it was, how much it will rehydrate to, and that will help me with planning my emergency buckets. So that's basically where we are now, and that is all I have to show you for this round. And hopefully it didn't end up being a totally rambling 36 minutes. But yeah, whew. So if you have any other questions or any questions, anything you'd like to ask me, anything you'd like to talk about, let me know in the comments down below, and I will respond as quickly as possible. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful to you at all. If I left out some detail, or like I said, you have any questions, just let me know. And yeah, hopefully that was helpful, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off. And as always, I hope the rest of your day is good and your life stays wonderful. Thank you so much for watching. See you later. Bye.